Okay, let me, a little background here. I was here a couple of years ago, and I want to kind of tell you what dam sense the team has kind of evolved into lately. For a long time, it was myself, some volunteers, in and out of government. We're a team that, basically had a lot of expertise, a lot of it in government. In fact, one of those people is here with us today in an anonymous capacity, but this person happens to be undoubtedly the foremost expert in salmon rivers, salmon on the Snake River and Columbia River and the lower Snake dams. And he's part of the team too. So we've got a great group of people. Ken mentioned the Milgard grant. We were also a part of that and have been able to hire some staff since then. So I'd like, if I could see them, is point out a few of these people that are here. Kelly, it just was up here. Kelly, raise your hand. And we got, let me get a few of them. Tyson is in here someplace. Yeah, where are you? I can't see anybody. All right, and we got Elizabeth. She's here, yes. And also Amy Everling is one of our great volunteers, and many of you know Sharon Grace, I think, who is here someplace. And it was kind of great, interesting. We went through this grant process. I'd never done that before, and they said, well, you got to tell us about your in-kind work. And I'd never added it up, so I did for the sake of this grant. And we didn't get anywhere near money like we discovered the in-kind amount for the last 3 or 4 years for professional services donated to this cause has been over $2.5 million. Wow. So there's been a lot of good mental energy going into this. Let me get started. I'm going to try to go through a presentation real quick, and I got a little flick for you, and then I got my, London's going to come up and help me close. Anyway, I'm going to start off with this image of the kind of vision of the salmon, the orcas. And the image on the left is kind of like what we all want over there in the Strait of Juan de Fuca, is to be able to go down to the fish market, and buy fish. Well, you can't get a photograph of that, but you can't do that anymore. You haven't been able to do that for decades. And so this is the other aspect. We need fish for viable commercial tribal fisheries, and that's part of it as well. So let me see if I can figure out how to use all this equipment. Let's see, I guess. Pushing the wrong button, obviously. Okay, so just a quick, Ken kind of started on this, but what are these southern residents are eating Chinook about 80% of the time. And so quickly, where does it come from and how much do they eat? Well, basically, they eat about 1,500 pounds a day if you calculate it on the 17-pound fish, which was kind of the lower end of what they should be eating, because the smaller the fish, the more they have to chase them around. But basically, that means they need 500,000 fish per year. Now, most people can't put that into perspective of what that really means in terms of what's out there in the ocean. But basically, to put it in perspective, number one, the record Chinook caught in Port Angeles Salmon Derby earlier this year was just 16 pounds. And so that lets us know right off the bat that the 17-pound fish is becoming harder and harder for orca to even find. The other thing, just to put it into perspective, is that the total Chinook runs coming back to the Puget Sound, averaged over about 10 years, is between 200 and 300,000. So you can see that the Salish Sea, Puget Sound area does not have anywhere near enough fish to support these southern residents. So where do the other ones come from? Ken mentioned the Fraser River. And so that's been primarily the summer source. And what I've got circled on this chart is the blue bars on that chart basically indicate relative population abundance during the summertime. And so that was our summer food source for the southern residents. But as you can see, the trend has been down, and it's been really awful in the recent last few years. So that means the Fraser is a problem. So where are they going? They're going out and trying to find another source. Now, you've seen this map before, but this is basically the Chinook runs in the Puget Sound area. 9 of them are extinct. The rest are critically underused because of their degraded habitat and so forth like that. And a lot of money is being spent on trying to correct that habitat. But to put that in perspective, this, and my chart's messed up. Somehow That yellow area up there on the upper left-hand corner is supposed to be the area of the Puget Sound that I just showed you on the last chart. And as Ken was pointing out, you know, our friends in the state of Washington say, well, the Snake River's over there. And you can see on the lower right-hand corner in Washington is a little bit of the Snake River watershed. What they forget to tell us is that whole big blue area there, mostly in Idaho, in Oregon, is a huge, intact habitat area for Chinook. Problem is, very few of them make it back there because of all the dams, and particularly the Snake River dams. So what do we know about where they feed? Of course, you've seen this chart before, I think, but this is a NOAA chart that basically says that this is a track of a southern resident at the mouth of the Columbia River. And so we know, and this has been going on just not recently, but for thousands of years. So if they can't find these numbers and are burning off too many calories chasing them around all over the place because they've gotten smaller and smaller, and of course that releases toxins, I think you guys know the result. You get dead females and males too, and you've seen these probably before. So unfortunately, that's the problem. Now to stop this, we must immediately add hundreds of thousands of Chinook to Pacific coastal waters. And as Ken mentioned, it's nothing else, not less vessel traffic or less pollutants or putting more hatchery fish out there, or especially more litigation studies can accomplish that at all, or certainly any faster than breaching the lower snake dams. When you breach, well, let's, little context here. The lower snake, there's 20 million Chinook smolts are dumped into the Snake River each year. The mortality is about 10% per dam. And so for your math majors out there, you think about that for a second. Each one of these dams is killing roughly 2 million smolts. So by breaching one, you eliminate the death of 2 million young smolts. Now, about half of those will die on the other dams going down, and especially the reservoirs. But that'll still put 1 million smolts out there in the ocean to grow up, and half of those will grow up to adults probably, or maybe not half, but still the numbers are in the several hundreds of thousands with each dam you breach. And so that is the fastest way, because there you're talking about immediate prevention of death of smolts. But why breach now? What's the urgency? Well, we're down to less than 3% of the historic runs that used to be anywhere from 10 to 30 million. The government, your tax money has already been, we've spent $1 billion just in the last 16 years on failed dam passage, and that was adding gadgets to the dams to make it easier for juvenile fish to go over the dams. But that hasn't improved anything. It's been a waste of money. We've also spent a lot of money, billions, both tax money and ratepayer monies. By the way, how many of you people live in the state in Washington or Oregon? Okay, so you know that Bonneville Power produces a lot of your power. So anyway, that will come up in a second. But a lot of that money that you pay in your rates goes to habitat work, but a lot of it is getting wasted or suboptimized in that blue area I showed you on that chart. Why? Because the salmon aren't getting back to that habitat that you invested in. And basically, I think you can see from everything that we've said so far in this meeting is that Chinook and orca are out of time. As Ken pointed out, the population demographics with breeding females is critical. And so we're basically, fundamentally at the situation where we should have been breaching dams 3 or 4 years ago. And this is what the government documents are pretty clear about. The government data is clear about. We're not making this stuff up. One of these people that's in this audience right now today will tell you they should have been breached years ago. And so here we are, still debating about what to do. Some status on Chinook runs in 2017, and this is over the upper dam, lower Granite. After that, they're free to go to Idaho. But you can just quickly see, you don't have to pay a lot of attention to the actual numbers, but they're all red. That's because they're all down. And this has been going on for 4 or 5 years, but we keep hearing about people talk about record runs, when in fact, those record runs were an anomaly based on very low runs 20 years ago. But even so, today, that's not the case. So far this year, the Chinook are down 51%, And the jacks, which are the fish that return after 1 year, and they're not capable of reproduction in most cases, but they are an indicator of the future run. They're down 80%. So that means next year is going to be awful too for Chinook. And this is bad news for orcas, because these orcas are out there now and have been for 9 months trying to feed off these Columbia snake stocks, primarily snakes, but the numbers are so low, they're basically eating their seed corn now. And that's why breaching now, 2018, is so critical. If we don't get a food resource bump in the next 18 months, it may be all over for them. This is another chart, government chart, that basically shows survival rates and for Snake River Chinook. And what it basically says is on the left-hand side is 1, 2, 3, 4, and those are percents of survival. And if you're below 1%, you're basically headed toward extinction. And you can see from this chart that we've been low before. We had one anomaly high, but basically we've been hovering around 1, and we're now tanking down to near 0 in terms of survivability. And this is not just the dams, it is the reservoirs. The reservoirs are hot. They have a lot of predators in them that eat young smolts. And then you got dissolved gas that occurs when you spill too much water over these dams, and it gets into the fish, and then they embolize when they go over a dam. So none of this is good news for Chinook coming or going. In fact, the temperatures and gas are so bad that even may happen again, is they'll kill the adults coming up. This happens with sockeye a lot. So anyway, over 25 years of failed attempts for salmon recovery in this lake, we're still, the demands are, people say, well, you just can't tell the government to start breaching now. It takes a while. No, we've been at this for 25 years. We've been trying to tell, the government's own documents have been pointing out the need to breach is the only and best solution. So we don't have to take that argument that, oh, we need more time or more studies to do this. People say, well, what about the cost and economics and, and so forth of these dams? Well, basically, these dams return 15 cents on the dollar that you taxpayers invest in these dams. That's awful. And that's one of the big reasons the Corps of Engineers should be compelled to breach them immediately. We've also learned that over the last 5 or 6 years, the annual expenditures on the dams have exceeded revenues from hydropower. And this is particularly troublesome for Bonneville Power because they're losing money. They've been losing money big time on these dams for at least the last 5 years. I already mentioned $1 billion wasted. And a lot of people think, and we see evidence of this all the time from politicians, is that these are flood control projects and that Richland, Washington is going to get flooded or something. These are not flood control projects. They don't have any ability to stop floods. They're run of river. What comes in must go out every second. Very little irrigation that can be mitigated, and barge traffic by wheat farmers has already shifted to rail for the last 15 years. So we don't really have any economic issues there. Now, one of the things that people have been telling me I'm crazy, that Bonneville Power's, their rates are increases, and I'm pointing out how expensive the Snake River dams are, and it's kind of like, oh, well, Bonneville's okay, Bonneville's okay. Well, I don't know if you guys can recognize this guy, but this is Elliot Meinzer. He is the head of Bonneville Power Administration, and he is talking about their financial situation, okay? So let me see if I can play this. It's always a wonder if these things ever, will they work? Oops, I'm obviously not clicking correctly. Okay, Kelly, what am I on?
I would say, to be really frank, if there's an axis of sort of nonchalance to panic, I think it's important that we don't get into a panic mode. I'm not in a panic mode, but I'm in a very, very significant sense of urgency mode, and I do think that the risks facing Bonneville are real, and I feel that even though we've got 10 years left in our long-term contracts.
Okay, so there you have the administrator of BPA basically saying he's this close to panic. Now, this is a major utility in this country, and it's federally subsidized, and he's finally admitting how bad the situation is. Part of the reason is that there's so much hydropower that it's basically becoming, it's surplus, so much of it, and the cost of the dams is very expensive. It's going up every year, especially on the Snake River dams. And what this chart shows here is this is a Bonneville power chart that he was referring to in this meeting. And basically what it shows is the green line is the cost of producing power for Bonneville. And you can see that it's up around $38. And the open market price, and that's if you were, a utility would say, well, I don't want to buy my power from Bonneville, I want to get it someplace else on the open market, it's down there around 22. At the bottom, you see this little red triangle that says minus 16. That means at times, and on that particular day that I pulled that number, we were paying $16 a megawatt hour to California to take excess power. So this is not a good business model to be a part of, but you ratepayers in the Pacific Northwest, this is what you're facing. This is an interesting chart because this is from Bonneville Power, and what it shows over a 7-day period is the different production of the different power and the load in the system. So the power in these lights is this red line down here, and kind of in the middle, and it goes up a little bit every night and down, jumping around. But the blue line is hydropower production. And so you don't have to be an expert here to realize we are producing more than twice amount of hydropower as we have demand. And so what it does, and down at the bottom is wind and nuclear, and fossil is actually the lowest line. But what this does, it points out the problem. And that gray line in between the red and the blue, that's how much surplus power we have. And that's what's being sold at below market prices, or sometimes we have to pay California to take that. So when people tell you that, oh, if you breach these dams, the lights are going to go out in Seattle, or what are we going to do? It's going to cost $500 million to replace all that power. That's BS. Just tell them about this. You can look at this on your phone and just point out that we have got more hydropower than we know what to do with, and it's killing our rates, basically. And it also prevents wind from being used. And we noticed that wind was curtailed. That means the wind was blowing, but we shut the turbines down, Bonneville did, because it was too much. And so they paid those wind turbine operators to shut their power down, and that's your rates getting hammered there when they do that. Because why? There's too much hydropower. You might say, well, why can't they turn off the hydropower? Well, because when you cut off the turbines, the water has got to go over the spillway, which drives all this dissolved gas into the water, which gets into the fish, and then it causes embolism or gas bubble trauma, which either kills them immediately or maybe weeks later out in the ocean. One interesting fact, 4 snake dams last 93,000 hours of production. That's like almost 8 years of continuous production. Only 2 hours were actually used by BPA customers. The rest was sold at a big loss. And I already mentioned the wind curtailments. BPA's situation financially, I know you don't want to hear about this at an Orca conference, but it's funny how your rates and what you're paying for power has a direct relationship to the survival of the 7 resident killer whales. But basically, BPA is broke. Their debt-to-asset ratio is 99%. They owe $17 billion in debt. They have very little cash on hand. Customers are leaving, and they're taking money out of habitat to pay, to basically pay bills on the dams. And really, the only choice they have to save significant money is remove high-cost, underperforming assets. That's another word for four Snake River dams. That's about the only way out they have for this. People say, what do you get when you breach? Economic devastation? No. Well, first off, breaching, often you'll hear it cost a couple $2 billion. That's not true. It's about 340. Already mentioned, in the benefit to cost ratio, instead of being awful way below 1, it's at least 4 to 1. Even if you were to replace the power, which we've said you don't need to, so then it gets up to about 20 to 1. We should also point out that solar, there's 2,000 megawatts of solar. Now, that 2,000 megawatts is twice the production of the Snake River dams, is waiting to be put on Bonneville Power's grid. That's how economically viable even solar is. The other thing about these dams is they take money away from other projects the Corps BPA has, and notably here in the Puget Sound is a massive Corps project it's now almost $500 million. It's unfunded. And that would do a lot of habitat restoration work for Chinook and other species, but all that money is going into Snake River dams for absolutely nothing. Now, people will say, well, you can't breach them because of this or because of this, and Congress has got to authorize breaching. No, that's not the case. There's no new authorities needed to breach these dams. The Corps has already the responsibility to do that. The Corps has an environmental impact statement. It's right here, and it has in it breaching, so we've got a NEPA document. BPA can pay for the breaching through their ratepayer mechanism and credit mechanisms. And this court-ordered stuff where the judges are saying go and study that stuff, that is not an excuse not to do something now. That does not give them a get-out-of-jail-free card. And breaching is really easy because it's a matter of something could be in a matter of months, not years, because we're just talking about an earthen berm. So what's holding us up? One is this confusion over this biological opinion in court. This document is over on the left-hand side. It's there in 2002. It's an environmental impact statement. This is one of 12 volumes, $33 million. This is the breach appendix. This is an actual breach plan here, developed by the government. And it's been sort of put to the side and said, we don't want to look at that. In the meantime, over here on the right is 25 years or 20 years of litigation, and it's not going to get us anywhere. We've been litigating, even though the 5 victories in court, they've been process victories, but that's not leading to a breach, and it never will. There's the more on the what that EIS is, what's stopping us. One thing is we have environmental groups that are part of litigation that want to see this go on and on. This is a letter from one of the large environmental groups, and they basically said a year and a half ago, they told their base, the feds are now considering dam removal for the first time ever. Wait a minute. This is a breach document the feds did 15 years ago. Anyway, this generated 400,000 comments and made the Corps of Engineers and BPA delighted. As you might imagine, because now they get to study for this for another 5 years and spend another $100 million of your tax money. Ken mentioned the governor's task force. It's not going to accomplish anything unless they immediately recommend to the Governor Inslee to breach right now. Okay, Kelly, what should I do on this thing? I want to play the 3-minute video here, and then London will wrap it up for us.
Snake River runs more than 1,000 miles along through the Umatilla Nation, Nez Perce and the Yakima. For our written history, they'd worshipped on the banks. Salmon was the sacrament for which they all gave thanks. Let the river run free. When Kamikaze signed his name, he knew he'd been betrayed. He bit his lip till the blood ran down the crowd, his bitter rage. He'd stood so tall and fought so well at the end of the day. He ceded all their sacred land, all the bodies of the slain. Let the river run free. Let the river run free. Came Colwell paranoia, came the Corps of Engineers. Came the steel and stone and concrete of the Slackwater profiteers. Laid down that river straight to hell without a single tear. They choked that living river where the salmon used to rear. Let the river run free. Seems no matter where you turn, things go from bad to worse. You can speak of truth, of consequence, but their lies so well rehearsed. Till the rumble of a million voices calls to you and me, and we raise our voice as one. Let the river run free. Now the salmon runs are nearly done, and their light has left the stream. Politicians spoiling the scheme. While ecosystems falter, they point and cast the blame. They spin their propaganda while we play their waiting game. Let the river run free. Seems no matter where you turn, things go from bad to worse. You can speak of truth and consequence, their lies are well rehearsed. Still the rumble of a million voices starts with you and me. When we raise our voice as one, let the river run free. It's time to breach the dams, let Mother Nature take a course. Heal that mighty river and revive its vital source. For the orca, for the fishermen, for the whole economy, and for all eternity, let the river run free. Let the river run free. Let the river run free. Let the river run free.
I just want to point out this film and song was written by a couple of those volunteers that I mentioned that put some pro bono effort, and one of them just happened to be walking in, Nolan Murray, who's the fiddle in there, just walked in. Okay, London, where are you? Oh. Come on up. Thanks. Okay, wrap it up for us, London, and then I'll have one thing to say after you finish.
Okay.
Welcome back.
So I would like to thank Jeff and Kimberly Ventry for holding this event and inviting me to speak to you this afternoon. It's an honor and privilege to be here, even given the circumstances surrounding this event. I would also like to thank all of our esteemed guests, colleagues, sponsors, and volunteers who work hard to put this event together for us. So let's give them a big round of applause. So I would first and foremost like to thank Howard Garrett and everyone at the Orca Network for supporting me since day one. So thank you. I would also like to thank Dr. Balcom and the Center for Whale Research, Jim Waddell, damn sense, Dr. Visser and the Orca Research Trust, Dr. Deborah Giles, Dr. Lori Marino, Jessica Ferrer, and last but certainly not least, Dr. Philip Clapham at NOAA. You have all been instrumental in my education and journey to follow in your footsteps, your very large footsteps. So my name is Len Fletcher. I'm a Washington State native, president and founder of the Blue Advocates Group, which is a group of kids and teens in Blaine who work to spread awareness about the problems facing our ecosystem. I am a responder for the Watka Marine Mammal Stranding Network and a trainee research assistant at the Orca Research Trust and leopardseals.org, both in New Zealand. I would like to address the elephant in the room. As some of you may already know, one of our southern residents, L92, a 23-year-old male, has recently died. His presumed cause of death is yet again malnutrition. This brings us to a 30-year all-time low of only 75 southern resident orca left in existence, and the situation has never been more critical. I come to you today on behalf of these critically endangered killer whales and the students and faculty at Blaine Elementary, junior, and senior high schools, and as a citizen of the state of Washington. Over the last 6 years, I've devoted my life to the study and protection of the southern resident killer whales. Through my work as a responder for the Watka Marine Mammal Stranding Network and ongoing education research, including dozens of lectures and symposiums put on by the Orca Network, Orca Superpod, and the Center for Whale Research, and hundreds of other events, it has become crystal clear that there is a critical need to save what is left of our endangered southern resident killer whales from starvation. Through my volunteer work, trips to the Snake River, and time spent in San Juan Islands, I have gained experience and seen firsthand what is happening to our orca. We are in a state of absolute emergency, and the evidence is overwhelming. The orca are starving, and action must be taken now. I've been to the Snake River dams. I've witnessed fish pressed up against the inadequate fish ladders. Together with my family, I've witnessed government agencies sucking up anestheticized fish and dumping them in hot metal dump trucks in the early hours of dawn, as not to be seen by the public. With my own hands, I have felt the water, bath warm, slack water, which is too hot for our local salmon to breed. I've even spoken with dam employees who spread misinformation. As if reading from a script, they lied directly to my face. This is a direct result of corporate greed and failure of our Washington state government to uphold the Endangered Species Act of 1973, which guarantees protection for these critically endangered whales. The law requires federal agencies, in consultation with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, to ensure that the actions they authorize, fund, or carry out are not likely to jeopardize the continued existence of any listed species or result in the destruction or adverse modification of designated critical habitat of such species. The law also prohibits any action that causes the taking of any listed species of endangered fish or wildlife. The fact is that the Washington state, as well as the United States government, has failed to protect these animals and the ecosystem to which they belong. The dams are no longer the least impactful or renewable resource, but are instead very harmful to the aorta of our ecosystem. We have legal and moral obligations to uphold these values in our Constitution. When they listed our orcas as endangered under the Endangered Species Act, they made a promise. A promise to protect them, a promise to preserve their habitat, and a promise that future generations, such as my own, will be able to look over the water and see this national treasure in their own habitat, swimming freely without fear of starving to death, being captured for displays in zoos and aquariums, or having their calls drowned out by the ever-increasing marine traffic. This future is beginning to fade if action is not taken now. The fact is, our southern resident killer whales are dying. They're dying from a lack of a noise-free habitat, and most of all from starvation. Washington state is also wasting hundreds of millions of dollars of taxpayers' money. Currently, Bonneville Power Association is borrowing from Peter to pay Paul. Meanwhile, all of our power surplus is being sold below market value. With the renewable and greener wind and solar energy that is now online, hydroelectric power is surplus and not even used for peak power, leading to a benefit of only $15 for each dollar invested, meaning 85 cents is wasted for every dollar spent. Bonneville Power is an out-of-control debt spiral, and the solution is simple. To put it simply, these Snake River dams don't even produce enough electricity to cover their operating costs. And did I mention they're killing our salmon and in turn our orca? This future cannot come to pass. We cannot let greed and bad economics win the day. It is time for us to unite as one and do what is right to remove the 4 lower Snake River dams, starting with the lower Granite Dam and the Little Goose dams, and impose an immediate 2-year moratorium on Chinook salmon fishing. We cannot wait any longer to rebuild salmon runs. We must all stand together in this fight. Today I make a stand. I stand with the Center for Whale Research. I stand with Orca Network. I stand with the Milgard Foundation. I stand with Maya's Legacy. I stand with the University of Washington, and I stand with the citizens of Washington State. I stand with the people all over this country who have spent hundreds of thousands of hours writing letters, protesting, holding town halls, symposiums, workshops, and meetings. I stand with those who have called and written our leaders, only to be turned away and ignored. We are the future, and we will not stand idly by as some of our leaders scratch the backs of those who would tear down this world and watch the ecosystem collapse to make $1. Enough is enough. Today I make a pledge and I ask you all to do the same. I make a pledge to be the next to hold the torch and lead the fight to protect these whales. But the burden of saving these animals is not just one person's or one research center's to bear, as it has been for almost 50 years. I pledge that I, along with my colleagues, will be the light in the darkness and a voice for the voiceless. The time for us as a people to make a change and pledge our commitment to saving our seas is now. The road ahead is long and the enemy is cunning, but we will be the change we want to see in this world, and we will be the death of these dams. To the leaders that ignored the cries of your citizens, to the leaders who have sold our whales in exchange for campaign dollars and have chosen to sell yourself, to the special interest groups and turn a deaf ear to our call for change, we will haunt you. We will stalk you in our offices. We will meet you in your courts. We will meet you in your legislative halls and parliament chambers. We'll appear on television shows, podcasts, social media outlets, radio programs, and documentaries until every last citizen is reached. I will publish paper after paper and bring them to the highest courts in our country. Today I am young and life is long and my purpose is clear. Your days of killing our rivers, streams, fish, and precious southern resident killer whales are numbered, and I will not come alone. Today I can see far, for I stand on the shoulders of giants who have come before me, and the future is clear. We will tear down these dams, and we will save our southern resident killer whales. I hope that I can count on your support in the fight to come. We must breach the Snake River dams in 2018 before it's too late. Thank you.
We have cards outside if you'd like to write a note to Senator Murray, Cantwell, or Governor Inslee, that would be appreciated. Also, if anybody knows the governor or knows the senator, get a hold of us and let's talk about what you can do. That's really huge right now because we are running out of time.